There are many tales of people achieving all sorts of fortune and fame by selling their souls to the devil. Blues guitarist Robert Johnson is probably the most famous subject of that tall tale. The legend goes that he offered his soul at a Mississippi Delta crossroads, and in return, he would receive musical success and talents beyond his wildest dreams. And yes, to this day, he is considered a pioneer of American blues guitar and songwriting. But the devil is in the details, and with a life so shrouded in mystery, it's hard to separate fact from his very appealing fiction. Robert Johnson was born in Hazelhurst, Mississippi on the 8th of May 1911, spending much of his beginnings on a plantation in the Delta. His mother, Julia Mayer Dodds, was a daughter of slaves. Dodds had 10 children with her husband, but Robert was born out of an affair with a field hand named Noah Johnson. Later in Robert's childhood, Julia remarried and moved the family to Robinsonville, Mississippi. Robert seemed to take to music very quickly as a child, demonstrating keen musical ability both on the jaw harp and harmonica. That interest didn't fade as he grew into his teens, as he was absent from school more and more, which his friends attributed to him studying music in Memphis. He would also play around with a makeshift instrument called a Diddley Bow, which was a wire attached to a house that a person could pull taut and hit with a stick, altering the pitch with the bottle that slides along the wire. The early and teenage years of Robert Johnson are very much shrouded in mystery. Historians have had to lean on anecdotal tales from other musicians and friends of his from those days, which is a lot like playing a game of telephone. There just isn't that much to go on, and Johnson's nomadic nature made it even harder to get a sense of his beginnings. He'd pester every musician he could for a chance to share the stage or a jam session with them. Many times, between other musicians' sets, Roberts would take over the stage and play some songs of his own. Certainly a bit of a bold move. Legendary bluesman Son House knew Robert Johnson during these years and wasn't exactly blown away by the young man's ability at the time, stating, "Folks, they come and say, why don't you go out and make that boy put that thing down? He's running us crazy." Finally, he left. He ran off from his mother and father and went over in Arkansas, someplace or other. When he was 18, Robert married 16-year-old Virginia Travers, but tragedy struck soon after as she died during childbirth. Rumors abounded that it was punishment for his burgeoning musician lifestyle, but he forged ahead, deciding to dedicate his life to becoming a bluesman. He did manage to marry again in 1931 at the age of 20, though she too died while giving birth. This set him down a very solitary path. Johnson would stay with numerous women, who he would return to from time to time, but he remained single, adopting different aliases. The women he frequented mostly didn't know about each other, and he preferred it that way. He was a loner, committed to playing music at his frequent stops on the road. At his shows, he would play mostly crowd-pleasing songs of the time, including jazz and country standards. And even though he would form strong temporary relationships with the townsfolk and local musicians, his stays would be brief, and then he would move on as easily as the breeze. Son House mentioned that Johnson went to Arkansas for a time and was somehow very different when he returned to Mississippi. The prevailing thought was that Johnson at the time was a mediocre guitar player, but overnight seemed to have gained an almost supernatural ability at the instrument. That's where the myth came about that he sold his soul to become a virtuoso guitarist and songwriter. Pop culture has had a long love affair with the idea of a man selling his existence to an evil entity for musical riches. The 1986 film Crossroads had leading man Ralph Macchio on a countrywide quest to learn about the legends of that devilish pact and to find a lost song that Robert Johnson never got to show the world. Oh Brother, Where Art Thou saw the trio of prison fugitives led by George Clooney coming across one Tommy Johnson who, you guessed it, sold his soul to Satan to be able to play the guitar. It's a fantastical story, and that's why it's been told for so long and in so many mediums. And of course, it's fiction, but why let the truth get in the way of a good story? What's more likely is that Robert Johnson practiced tirelessly at home and at any clubs that would give him an opportunity to play, and he even allegedly admitted to people that during his time away he had been studying with some kind of guitar teacher. But it seems like he had taken those lessons to some sort of new height. His technique was something almost completely new, in which some of his guitar lines mimicked what the bass parts of a piano would play. In fact, many who studied his playing noticed that he did some kind of impressive combination of playing slide, rhythm, and bass all at the same time while also singing. Playing non-stop is almost certainly where those chops came from. Those chops came in handy, as Johnson in 1931 was gaining enough traction to be able to play lots and lots of gigs. For most of the 1930s, Robert Johnson moved from his Mississippi Delta stomping grounds to Memphis and Arkansas, busking on street corners with his acoustic guitar for tips. When other musicians would offer him gigs, it traveled to New York, Chicago, and many other cities around the country. Johnny Shines was one of the musicians he would often share bills with during his touring. Turns out Shines is one of the sole sources of information that we have about Robert Johnson during those years. Shines met Johnson through a mysterious piano player up in Memphis, and even though the two didn't quite hit it off, eventually a friendship was formed. The two would hit a new town and set up on opposing street corners playing for tips. They both had a wandering spirit. Shines remembered, Robert was a guy, you could wake him up any time and he was ready to go. You say, Robert, I hear a train, let's catch it. And he wouldn't exchange no words with you. He was ready to go. It didn't make no difference where, just so he was going. Every single gathering you could imagine in the American South where you could enjoy music, Johnson and Shines would entertain at. House parties, soul food dinners, even coal yards and sawmills, the two could play music for the people who were gathered there. They encountered some hairy moments at a stop in Arkansas where Shines' cousin got into a shooting match with his father-in-law. Johnson and Shines took that as an omen and spent a few months in the northern part of the country near Detroit. But Robert felt the call of the Mississippi Delta deeply and always returned back home. Robert Johnson did seek out a more permanent partner in 1936, but this was in the form of making connections so that he could finally lay down some music in the studio. He was eventually paired up with producer Don Law, but it wasn't a conventional studio they recorded in. It was a hotel in San Antonio. Regardless of the facilities, those 3 days of recordings would go down as some of the most important sessions ever in the history of blues and rock music. Johnson recorded in the corner of one of the rooms, not because he was shy, as many music historians thought, but to concentrate the sound in one area, to maximize the sound of the guitar, which by then Johnson was quite proficient with. Terraplane Blues, Come On In My Kitchen, and Kind-Hearted Woman Blues were some of the 16 songs that Johnson laid down, and then another session in Dallas next year netted several more tunes. Overall, the total output of Robert Johnson's recording sessions in his life was 29 songs, but that small amount of music influenced everyone from the Rolling Stones to Muddy Waters to Led Zeppelin to Fleetwood Mac. Almost any artist who worked within blues arrangements, and many who did not, owe some kind of debt of gratitude to the bluesman. Terraplane Blues actually became a modest enough hit in his own lifetime, but his legacy wouldn't grow until long after his passing, which was imminent. Just a year after his Dallas recordings, Robert Johnson died in Greenwood, Mississippi. No one knows the cause, but he was a mere 27 years old at the time. The public and the press had no idea he had passed away, and it wasn't until 30 years later that a historian happened upon his death certificate. He was simply found on the side of a country road with no potential motives or reasons for his passing. Some say it was a jealous husband who murdered him after Johnson flirted with his wife. Other accounts say that he was poisoned. In more recent years, some medical professionals have floated the theory that it could have been syphilis. In fact, the back of his death certificate had a handwritten note stating the disease as his cause of death, which, with his proclivity for women, wouldn't be far out of the realm of possibility. But like so much of his legends, no one really knows how to fill in the gaps, and no one really knows where he is buried. The timing of his death could not have been worse. Johnson was just about to be showcased at Carnegie Hall for a monumental tribute concert. His meager success so far with his songs would undoubtedly have skyrocketed after such a high-profile event. Prominent Columbia Records executive John Hammond had Johnson in mind specifically to lend his talents to the event, but Well, sadly it was not to be.
And your father will give me father.
Ironically, decades later, John Hammond would put together the album reissue of Robert Johnson's songs that would finally make him a household name as the father of music blues. 1961's King of the Delta Blues Singers might not have made the splash that it did without some serendipitous events, but Hammond took one of those freshly pressed LPs in 1961 and handed it to Bob Dylan. Dylan was immediately enthralled and even featured the cover of Johnson's record on one of his own album covers. Soon later, Johnson's album would be the barometer of how hip somebody was in the 1960s. Eric Clapton would take the torch and run with it too, playing some of his music in Cream and then devoting an entire album to Johnson later in his career. Strangely, if white rock musicians hadn't copped many of his songs when rock music was exploding in the 1960s, we may never have heard of Robert Johnson. Again, it cannot be overstated just how unknown Robert Johnson was at the time of his death and for long after outside of serious music collectors. Not only was no one really aware of how he died or where he was buried, but most people didn't even know that he was a thing. Until the 1960s, Robert Johnson was on very few people's radar as far as his talent and the things he contributed to the musical world was concerned. In the 1990s, Johnson's legacy received another shot in the arm with the release of the complete recordings. The reissue sold a few million copies and won a Grammy Award for Best Historical Record, shining a light on his accomplishments all over again. Some artists wish they could build a body of work over decades, releasing album after album of consistent material. Robert Johnson did that in just 2 recording sessions. It was a couple of days' worth of work that would change guitar music in a way that's not really credited properly. The fact that he also had the devil story about him selling his soul only enhances his mythos. It's like creepy icing on the cake, but in no way it diminishes the quality and urgency of his music. That is plenty devilish by itself. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below. Do not forget to subscribe for brand new videos just like this a couple of times a week. And as always, thank you for watching.